Buenos días a todos. Bienvenidos a la presentación del Informe de Energía Renovables 2021. Vamos a hacer esta presentación en inglés y vamos a cambiar a esto. Me alegro de que estéis todos aquí, que estéis todos bien. Ya hemos hecho otra jornada, pero esta es la primera de presentación de los informes de la agencia que hacemos este año. I'm going to switch to English because our good friend Heymi Bahar always try to present the report in English, and this is what we are announced for doing that in English. Well, this is thank you, Heymi, for coming here once again, just in the Zoom, but I hope next time you will be here as always, because this is the 7th or something like this. You came here to introduce it, to present this report, Renewables 2021, the analysis of forecast to 2026. And this time you will see that the forecast for 2026, I think this is a brilliant report. I think that very positive future. You will see your forecast for renewables energy. And this is interesting because now you have said that we are following the path. Maybe we need to increase this to get this net zero. You are going there, but this is a very positive, very resilient renewables in that time of these pandemic times we are now. Well, Europe has done very well. We are the 2020, we are 22% of renewables in the final energy solution, and in Spain we have 21.3, I think. And this is we got over our forecast, and I think you are. And we'll see after this. You have a very good about the European Union and India and China overshooting their goals for the near future. Well. Thank you very much again for trying. You can download for the public. You can download this free of charge. This is a very interesting report. You can do it from the web of the International Energy Agency. And thank you for coming. And you can put your questions in the preguntas y respuestas or in the chat, or you can send to Ana Padilla, ana.padilla@enerclub.es. And after this first introduction, a first presentation by Heymi, we will follow a Q&A session answering for him. I suppose there will be a lot of this. Heymi, you know him. Heymi Bahar is a big analyst in the renewables in the energy. He joined energy several years ago, but he's a very young analyst over there. He studied in Istanbul. He has a strong relationship with Spain. Heymi, thank you for coming, and the floor is yours.
Hello, everybody. I'm trying to put my slides on. Okay. Thank you very much, Arcadio, and thank you very much, Spanish Energy Club, once again inviting me to present. And I'm very happy to present the report in the 7th time, and very upset not to be there in Madrid with you to present this in person. Hopefully, Renewables 2022 report we will be presenting in person. I would like to share with you our main findings from the Renewables 2021 report, which included not only renewable energy forecast as usual, but also several additional analysis that we did on the commodity prices, storage, green hydrogen, and so on and so forth, which I will touch upon in my presentation. I'd like to start with a bit of a history and what happened in 2020 and what we expect in 2021. So as you can see, the renewable energy markets, these are the annual capacity additions, increased over time, but there was a step change in 2020, a 40% increase compared to 2019. This can come with a surprise to some of the audience because there was the COVID-19 crisis or the supply chain situation, mobility challenges, and so on and so forth. But policies tend to be stronger and business tend to be stronger in resolution of these issues that we had in 2020, especially in two markets where there were policy deadlines, United States and China, and the developers rushed to finish their projects. Actually, China alone installed last year in 2020, 70 gigawatts of wind power alone, accounting for 80% of the whole market in 2020. And 2021 was a big question when we started doing the forecast for 2021. And the reason behind that is that whether the policy will remain after these rushes, what's going to happen to the market, will COVID-19 challenges continue, and so on and so forth. But we observed since 2020 actually improved policies in the first place, and also countries announcing new goals and targets leading to COP26, which in our opinion resulted in a positive result. And that's why we expect another record year in 2021 to happen, or it already happened. We don't have the data yet. This is still a forecast, but we expect a record growth in 2021 due to the strong renewable energy markets. This time there's a new challenge, as you all know here, about the commodity prices, but despite this, we expect a strong growth coming forward. Looking at the rest of the forecast, we call this a step change when you look at the two sides of this figure, the one from 14 to 19 and 21 to 26. There is an important change in the pace, and we expect about 350 gigawatts to be commissioned almost in 2026. However, can renewables go faster? The answer from the IEA is always yes, because the technology there, the market is there, and we know how to solve several challenges, but there are three important challenges remain, which we repeat every year and which we analyze every year country by country. The first one is the policy uncertainties still in many markets. The second one is the grid expansion and integration of renewables. And the third one is basically the financing or low-cost financing that is happening in many parts of the world, especially in developing markets. If governments address these challenges, renewables can actually grow much faster, with annual additions reaching over 450 gigawatts. This obviously will put renewables in a better situation compared to long-term targets, which I will come back to that later. Looking at the technological differences that we see, obviously historically there's a big shift towards wind and solar. Already last 5 years, wind and solar accounted for 80% of the renewable capacity growth. In the next 5 years, we expect this to consolidate, with hydropower and other technologies remaining stable. Wind and solar PV, or variable technologies, are expected to account for 90% of the growth. And in our main case, we see an important transformation of the power system in the next 5 years, which is namely that we expect the increase in power capacity to be almost 100% or 95% dominated by renewables. This is the growth. Obviously, the share of renewables will be in 2026 still 36%. It will become the largest source of generation globally, but there's obviously a long way to go for the deep decarbonization of the markets. There is obviously an accelerated case for our technology-specific point of view as well, especially for solar PV. There are a lot of barriers on the distributed PV side, and for utility scale PV and onshore wind projects, there is the grid barriers that are grid pace of implementation is slower usually than the implementation of renewables. But for onshore wind, we see an important upside if government addresses the challenges concerning permitting, which is a critical challenge starting to be everywhere. So it is important to solve those challenges, smooth the permitting procedures, because there's a big shift between developers to go between onshore wind and solar PV. However, I would like to highlight an important part for non-PV and wind technologies, bioenergy, geothermal, and CSP, which are dispatchable renewable technologies, which we need to integrate wind and PV. However, their growth is actually slowing down due to technology-specific challenges. For hydropower, this is the permitting. For CSP, the competitiveness. For geothermal, pre-development risks, and bioenergy is the supply chain inadequacies and costs that are higher. And more importantly, the commonality of these dispatchable renewables, they can create value, they have challenges, but there are no policies or very limited policies supporting them. Looking at the regional picture in the next 5 years, we expect renewables to accelerate growth everywhere in the next 5 years compared to the period of 2015 to 20. Obviously, China accounts for the majority of this growth, like 43% of the global growth will come from China, followed by Europe, United States, India, and other regions. China is expected to reach its solar PV and wind target during our forecast period, which means that 4 years earlier than their plan, which is a track record of China with the previous targets and with their especially net zero target and new policies that are supporting faster acceleration of renewables is an important factor. EU accelerates. We also expect EU to overshoot its 2030 current targets and be more in line with Fit for 55 targets that are being discussed and will be approved very soon, which is not included in our forecast. India records an important acceleration of growth, which is doubling in the next 5 years, driven by economics and the policy support. The growth also is fast in Latin America, ASEAN, and Africa and Middle East. One of the reasons behind this is that governments are seeing wind and solar as a cheap option to deploy compared to the other technologies. Even in some ASEAN countries where the fossil fuels was the cheapest option, now the picture is changing slowly. Looking at the focus on the European Union, European Union has been growing fast and the capacity is growing very rapidly, driven by also Spain in the last 2-3 years where there's an acceleration. We expect an important acceleration of growth in the European Union in both main and accelerated cases, driven by Germany, obviously, but Spain being the second largest market after Germany, despite the several challenges that we can discuss. But I would like to touch upon the important trend that countries are actually very much in line to exceed their NECP for 2030, the official NECPs that they are prepared. We see that the growth acceleration of 50% puts countries ready actually for the new target, Fit for 55, which new NECPs will be developed in the coming years. But we partly reflect this in our forecast. And it is important to mention that solar PV growth for the first time will exceed in the European market the wind. It used to be that wind was the largest component of the growth last 5 years. As you can see, in the next 5 years, we see an important shift towards also the larger utility scale projects being deployed, driven by Spain mostly, not definitely from Germany, where distributed PV is more heavy weighted. We expect an important capacity to come online, driven by solar PV. The reason why also in Europe solar PV excels better than wind, the reason behind this is actually very simple, because permitting and social acceptance has been a large challenge in many European countries, including Spain. So renewables used to this figure, and before the commodity price increases, we were estimating an important continuation of the cost decline for solar PV and onshore wind, although at a slower pace than historical. However, the new market showed us a surprise that for the first time, we expect renewable investment costs or capex to increase in the coming years, especially if renewable costs or commodity prices remain high in 2022 and logistical prices. What we saw in 2021, steel prices, aluminum, polysilicon, wafer, critical minerals, and freight costs double, triple, quadrupled, and sometimes for the freight cost increased by 7-8-fold. And we analyze this in very detail, how these materials cost changes affect the cost of wind and solar PV in full and partial way. And our scenario shows that if the costs remain high, we may actually erase 5 years of cost reductions for onshore wind and 3 years of cost reductions for solar PV in the coming years. This cost increases affect mostly the projects who signed contracts in 2018, 19, 20, but they are not commissioned and they did not secure actually an important equipment part of their business. So we calculate that around 100 gigawatts of projects are at risk of delays, maybe risk of delays for this kind of a commodity price increase. Obviously, large companies, including those in Spain, can absorb some of these costs within their system. But if the costs continue towards 2022 as a high, we estimate that the capacity growth that we see on utility scale will need 100 billion additional investment for the same capacity to deploy. So this is an important factor that should be taken into account. Imagine that 100 billion could have been used to deploy more capacities, but in this case, the more expensive renewables is challenging where the money will be allocated and depending on the situation. What governments can do, obviously the commodity prices are in market, so this is not much to do on that side, but providing predictable and strong policies and strong vision on renewables remain important to reduce the risks in that sense. Stimulus discussion has been a topic since the beginning of 2020 after the COVID-19 crisis. Everybody was hoping and thinking that the stimulus packages will create a big market and basically showing the world that the economic rebound can be stimulated by renewables. When you look at the recent numbers that we expect at the IEA that coal will break a record this year, CO2 emissions probably will increase or will have increased. Last year, due to the coal consumption, we are going to release our CO2 emissions report in the coming month. That will actually put a number on it. We don't know yet, but emissions from electricity sector alone, we already announced in our electricity market report that it will probably break another record. So we looked at what type of money is provided to clean energy public spending at the IEA. And we did a bit of a deep dive on how much renewable electricity and renewable fuels will take. In that sense, we estimate or we see in the data that 42 billion, just 10% of the whole public spending on clean energy will be go to renewables. This number may surprise many of you because renewables are very big, why they are getting so little money. But actually the money is going to the sectors which are more difficult to decarbonize, which is in our opinion, the right way of doing it. For instance, energy efficiency and transport sector and transport infrastructure takes the bulk of the investment from the public sector. European Union is the largest public spender with the program that is released in RFF, Recovery Fund, the Resilience Fund. And this fund provides a lot of grants, including Spain, that many countries applied. But the most important thing for us is basically the leverage factor of the private sector that will use these public funding and how they are distributed. In that sense, the most important component for us is to match or overmatch this public money with the private money. We calculated that low and high private sector participation into basically the public money that will be done. For us, there needs to be the right policies to attract capital investment, obviously. And if private sector is attracted to this public money, we can see mostly driven by the distributed PV and utility scale PV, an important investment of additional 400 gigawatts that could be mobilized and installed in the coming years. But on the other side of the picture, if the policies are not there and the structures are not there to distribute and allocate this money correctly, we may see less than 100 gigawatts additional investment that may come. So hydrogen is the new hot topic everywhere, especially in the European Union. For the first time this year, we looked at the short-term impact of hydrogen. Obviously, in the longer term, there are a lot of expectations. IEA is looking at every single project announcement of hydrogen. As you know, we have a hydrogen project database that is published online for free. But what we did, we took the next step and we analyzed in the short-term plan projects what will be the additional renewable capacity that may actually be deployed. And we estimate that about 8 gigawatts of the electrolyzer capacity that will be dedicated for new renewables. There will be more electrolyzer capacity probably will be deployed, but they will mostly use in the short term, half of which will be used in the short term existing renewable assets or the assets that are already in our forecast to be deployed by contracting them basically with PPAs or so on and so forth. So they are not going to have an added value into the new market in the short term. But for some projects, especially in China and mostly in Europe, Europe is in this case mostly Spain and Germany, and some also in Poland. There are plans to install renewable power plants, mostly wind and solar PV, dedicated to the production of hydrogen. We expect in the next 5 years this amount to about 18 gigawatts based on the planned projects. However, they will be realized. It's a big question mark right now, especially in the short term. But when you look at our overall picture, this only accounts for less than 1% of our forecast, which means that it's rather negligible, actually, what hydrogen will create in the short term for the renewable energy market. We also looked at the storage market and to put a perspective on the storage market. As every time I basically discuss this in Spain, the big question always comes with the storage market, and we try to answer this question here in the new analysis. We expect an important, in the next 5 years, battery storage to be installed, about 50 gigawatts. In the end, batteries will basically lead the market, followed by pumped hydro, which provides a long-term storage, as you know. And most of the investments are in China, where there's a strong plan and push for pumped storage hydro to penetrate, to integrate the penetration of wind and solar PV. And very sadly, the concentrated solar power sector is basically falling significantly behind. This is the investment side of the picture, which is important. And global storage capacity will expand about 60%. However, at the IEA, we look at most of the energy content of the storage, because this is the most important part for integration of renewables. We see a big shift from 2020 to 26, where batteries will have a larger storage capability than CSP plants. So although CSP is also growing, the battery expansion is significantly much faster than the CSP. However, we have to put things into perspective in terms of the energy capability, storage capability of the different technologies. pump storage plants have by far the largest storage capability in the world. There are few plants in Spain that are waiting for approval not only for the Spanish market, but will help for the European market for the integration. So obviously pumped hydro has a lot of challenges, despite being currently the lowest cost storage technology, especially in the long term, in the long hours of storage, above 3-4 hours. However, obviously the market is very difficult because it takes about 10 years to permit a pump storage plant and 6 months to install a battery pack, utility scale large battery pack with all the approvals. So in that sense, there is a big difference, and the money mostly going towards a different market, which has an important value. And we see at the IEA, actually, they are not competitive, PSH and batteries, they are actually complementary, one from providing very short-term storage capabilities, the other one long-term storage capabilities, daily or monthly sometimes, that is actually needed for the higher penetration of renewables. We don't talk that much about the biofuels market, which had the worst year over the last 3 decades in 2020, with the mobility restrictions and the policies that basically show the oil mandates, mandating with the gasoline and diesel are basically declined the demand for biofuels historically in 2020. But we expect an important rebound in 2021. But we actually used to expect a bit higher before the high commodity prices, which led to high biofuels prices. So biofuels could actually be 4% higher than our estimate in 2021. Still, it fully recovers, even in the conservative scenario that we have here with the high commodity prices. This production is driven by still United States and Brazil, 2 largest markets. But in the future, the growth is driven by Asia, notably in Indonesia and India. India is expected to grow so much that it will be the 3rd largest ethanol market, surpassing China and Europe in the coming years. And other Asian markets are leading the way. And most of the, basically, you see the North America and Latin America part growth is driven by the rebound from the economic crisis. But we have also an important challenge ahead. And there is also a shift in terms of the fuel choices of renewables. Different policies stimulate different growth. When you look at after the 2021 rebound, we see ethanol and biodiesel actually declining in the United States and Europe, but increasing significantly in Brazil, Asia, and rest of Africa. The reason behind the decline in advanced economies is due to the efficiencies of the fleet, but also policies that are making ethanol and biodiesel less viable compared to what are the targets of GHG declines. And however, there is a big interest on renewable diesel and biojet markets, which are the growing parts in the United States and Europe. Also, Asia, especially Singapore, is entering into the biojet market significantly, which may actually lead to a decarbonization of one of the most difficult sectors. To end my presentation, I like to basically touch upon a very important topic, that is, are we or we are not in line with net zero targets? You see here our forecast for 3 sectors: renewable electricity, biofuels demand, and renewable heat, all indicate the incremental growth that we see historically and in the future. All sectors show an acceleration in our main cases. For biofuels and renewable electricity, in our accelerated case, further expansion is possible with if governments address policy challenges. They are all good, but in order to be in line with net zero, renewable electricity capacity additions needs to almost double compared to our main case. in just short term. For biofuels demand, it needs to more than quadruple, and for heat, it needs to more than triple. So the challenge ahead is actually much bigger and significantly much bigger than what we see in the market going on. And we are just looking at the snapshot of the next 5 years. If we cannot achieve this growth pace in the coming 5 years, which means that beyond those 5 years, we need to accelerate even further in order to be in line with net zero. Net zero challenge by 2050 is not a challenge of meeting the barriers that renewable markets see. It requires an important policy ambition increase by the governments in the coming years, because 2050 is around the corner actually. And that's why meeting challenges will not be enough, but increasing ambition is and will be the most important role to play in addition to the reducing the barriers for renewables. Thank you very much for your attention, and happy to answer any questions. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Heymi. It was an outstanding presentation. I think we are seeing an increase, a bright forecast for the future in renewables in all this sector, heat, biofuels. You have included a new H2 hydrogen for the future. That's the first time you put in this forecast this, well, we will see much more in the near future for sure. Now we are going at the thank you for doing this presentation, and we are going to go with Anna to the question. You could see several questions in the chat, but she has more about this. Anna?
Thank you, Arcadio. Thank you, Heymi. Very clear and very interesting. Yes, there is several questions for you in the chat. Maybe you can see it, but I'm going to read it for you in group of 2, 3. The first question is, can the supply chain and the manufacturing base cope with the accelerated case that you mentioned? That is the first. Second is, what is the Mexico's contribution to the Latin American capacity growth in the period of analysis up to 2026? The person said that is surprised that the capacity growth is so high when the Mexican administration is less inclined. And a third question is, to what extent will higher energy prices offset the revised CapEx, OpEx costs for renewable energy developers? If you want to start with this.
Yes, I'll start. Meanwhile, I was looking at the detailed data on Mexico. If you allow me 1 second. Yes. Okay. So I'll start with the question 1 about the supply chain. So for wind and solar PV, for our accelerated case, especially the production capacity of the world, when you consider China as well, especially for PV and for wind, there is ample production capacity that can meet this demand. The first question, the accelerated case. For net zero is a different question, obviously. There needs to be a manufacturing investment that needs to be done. But obviously there are supply chain risks that were very obvious in these commodity price hikes. And we see at the IEA that what we experienced in 2020 and 21, the dependency of the certain products in a single region or a single market obviously creates a stress for the efficient use of the manufacturing capabilities around the world. There are many European countries and in the United States and India would like to get some of this market in order to diversify this manufacturing capabilities. But obviously the cost is a big issue. In terms of the demand, there is enough demand for the manufacturing capacity. Right now, we have solar PV demand of around 200 gigawatts and the manufacturing capacity of 300 gigawatts probably. For wind is even higher if you consider China. So in that sense, I'm not sure we will have a huge supply manufacturing-based problem, but supply chain is a different question and needs to be a little bit more diversified probably in the coming years. Coming to Mexico, I gave a regional picture on Latin America, but Mexico is one of the countries that we actually revised down the forecast. Thank you very much for the question, particularly reflecting the change of policies. I looked at the numbers. Mexico represents now less than 10% of the Latin American forecast. It used to be significantly higher when there were the green certificate auctions. Our analysis showed that we expect a big slowdown of the capacity growth of Mexico in the coming 5 years compared to last 5 years, obviously due to the uncertainties that we see in the market. The market growth that you see in Latin America is driven by Brazil, significantly, driven by Chile, and new markets of Colombia, Argentina, and smaller markets are coming to the picture, which affects our forecast mostly. And Chile is among one of the leaders in the short term of the hydrogen production for renewable electricity, which will affect their growth. The third question related to what extent will higher energy prices offset the revised higher cost for renewable energy developers? So we are in an interesting situation. Right now, renewable costs are higher, but fossil fuel costs are even higher. And we see renewables still a cheaper product despite the cost increases in the market, which is actually improving their competitiveness. This is very obvious. When you look at the latest contracts that are signed in Spain, even at a higher price, about 35 euros, it's important to mention that current electricity prices are at 200 euros or 250 euros. So, of course, this will not remain in the long term. But even if you take into account the 5 last years of average wholesale prices, the price of long-term contracts of renewables are around those prices right now. So in that sense, renewables can still bring benefits into the market to lower the costs. But as you know, the electricity markets work on a marginal price basis. So the last gas power plant gets the price. In that sense, it is very difficult to have an idea unless we cut the demand to achieve the results that we want. But in that sense, they improve the competitiveness, but they're also impacted by high energy prices because they use energy as an input to produce those manufacturing goods. But overall, they are still competitive.
Thank you. 2 more questions. First is, we see the electrolyzers capacity increase in the coming years. Have you also analyzed how the use of green hydrogen will be distributed? And another question is, what do you think, or what the IEA think about the proposal from the European Commission of considering nuclear and production of gas, natural gas in the taxonomy?
So the question on the electrolyzer capacity, how this will be used, it's a very good question. At the IEA, we raised this concern that there is a lot of projects, but where is the demand? In the short term, there are many projects that are proposed, are in the ports, and relevant to, first of all, the offshore wind industry in Europe, but also in markets where the decarbonization of the transportation sector. These are the initial demands. And in larger markets in Chile, there's an industrial involvement. Most of the use in the short term we see is on the transport side and ammonia, basically for the green ammonia production. So that's the thing. The second question, the natural gas. Obviously, this is an ongoing discussion. IEA doesn't put any strong opinion on this one, and we will see how this will go in the coming months, the discussion. But there's also a discussion on nuclear, so I don't have a strong opinion on this one. IEA probably will come in a more different opinion in the coming years and months.
Thank you. And two more questions, Heymi. Do you see that the current volatility current volatility in the wholesale electricity market could increase the demand for PPA?
Yes, definitely, because renewables provide a very important stable prices and at lower prices. And we actually saw in the recent months more interest in corporate PPAs than previous year, because in the end, for the industries, the most important thing is to secure their energy at a predictable price. So that will be my my answer to that.
Thank you. And related to that, maybe you can tell us a little bit more about the most common way to finance renewables at the moment is merchant auctions, PPA, and another one maybe also related is about, yes, with the current situation in the energy prices and also with the increasing in the share of renewable in the share of the electricity. Do you see necessary a revision of the wholesale market in Europe in particular?
That's the most important question. So most of the growth in our forecast is coming from auctions and the corporate PPAs. And for the distributed applications, that is of course separate. So auctions will be the part, but there's an increasing tendency for companies to combine multiple revenue streams. This is either towards a direction where you have some merchant tail, some PPA, and some auction contracts. So we see more and more this kind of a diversification of revenues, which is very good in that sense, in multiple ways. The other question about the wholesale market, this is $1 million question, how to design the new market with all these long-term contracts on the one hand, energy-only markets on the other hand. So it is very important to mention that there is no solution to this. Probably there needs to be a combination. European countries are working very hard to find a solution, because there is also the more renewables you have, more wholesale prices going to decline because of the zero. So our position on this, that there needs to be a hybrid model, which we don't know yet which model, but it needs to take into account long-term contracts to attract investment to the capital-intensive products, and then on the other hand, the short-term balancing to reflect the market prices for integration of renewables.
Thank you. Some more questions coming. Yes, first is what can we expect in the development of biojet in the next years? I think you talk a little bit. Biojet. Biojet. Yes. And another one is, how do you see the future development of self-consumption installation and local energy communities? And another one is why the progress on renewables heat is so limited, and what are the right policies to boost this?
Thank you. So we expect biojet market to grow very rapidly. There is an increasing interest in identifying the biojet opportunities by the airline companies. There is a IATA target, and airports are introducing many targets. There is an incredible interest to produce biojet. It's still expensive than the jet fuel, but the premium per consumer basis is actually very, very small. It is important also to mention that in Asia, the production is moving towards biojet from waste. mostly, and the waste products, and Europe and United States. We expect currently there's a very small production. What we expect is to quadruple in the next 5 years in our main case, but the upside is critical. Still though, even in our accelerated case of production, biojet remains a small market compared to ethanol, but the prospects are very high. The question on self-consumption for distributed PV projects, higher prices push people usually to self-consume more of their electricity and produce from solar PV where it exists. And I expect a wave of this investment coming up by the people if there is affordable financing. Usually in the high price environment, this happens. In different regions, this is reflected differently. In the US, people want to be independent, as you know, when the prices go up. In Europe, they want to reduce their bills. I think distributed applications, if supported well and with the right policies, can have a huge potential, not only for people or industries to save money on their bills, but as well as governments to delay grid investments where the energy is produced. The question on renewable heat is the most challenging sector in the world, both because of the residential sector, which is very segmented, and the renewable options are more expensive, and the awareness of the people to replace those is very limited. So on the one hand, on the second, on the industrial level, renewables cannot meet sometimes the requirements of the industrial needs. But overall, the most common thing is that there are not enough policies. Policy attention is very limited compared to the renewable electricity. And when policy attention is there, there is not enough awareness or communication to replace those. In order to increase the awareness, we released actually a tool, a renewable heat economics tool this year with the market report on the residential business, where we enable companies and individuals to compare different costs of the residential and commercial heating options from renewables and fossil fuels, and what kind of investments they can make. The right policies here is not only financial, as I said, is the awareness and the push and the regulation that will give efficiency requirements and maybe bans in the future of the fuel oil heating installations, like we will see in many European countries in the coming years.
Thank you. There is a couple of questions more. I don't know if you want to continue. Maybe you are already a little bit tired, Heymi.
No, it's okay.
It's okay, yes. There's someone asking about the prospect of offshore wind in Europe in particular, and cost, and maybe you can speak a little bit about the cost and the barriers.
So offshore wind, by 2026, we expect offshore wind market to account for 20% of the wind market, a record. Right now it's 3 or 4. So we see that the offshore wind will basically triple its share in the wind market. That's the first one. Europe will continue to lead the growth, obviously, in this case, but lead the growth for a while, not very long, because China is coming very fast, and many Asian and Latin American markets are really interested in basically investing in offshore wind. The costs in Europe are exemplary, where efficiency can be achieved and where things can be done in multiple industrial policy on the one hand, and the right policies on the other hand, and regulations. There is a lot of potential in Europe still to go. The limit is grid. The investment of grids are smaller, not in the offshore, but onshore actually. Offshore grid is resolved in many markets, but I expect Europe to further decrease the prices of offshore wind, and actually floating technology to be much more prominent, as we saw in the UK in the recent allocation of the land. Yeah.
Thank you. And another one, maybe the last. What's your view on biogas and biomethane in the future?
So the biogas is a very good distributed option in multiple ways, and it's an important part also decarbonize the gas grid. However, its production is very local. It has very development benefits. It has to be local because it brings a lot of economic benefits to local communities to process the waste products as well. So it will expand, but there are limitations of biogas. The reason why there are limitations is because of the available feedstock and the transportation and so on and so forth. But we will see an important biogas and biomethane future in local communities in Europe. But we need to keep the costs down to be able to have a sustainable business of biogas and biomethane. In my opinion, in terms of the waste products to use, it is one of the best ways of decarbonizing certain sectors, including the gas grid. But there are obviously feedstock limitations and transportation limitations of the feedstock to the places where it will be produced.
Thank you. Arcadio, I don't know if you want to add something. I don't have more questions so far.
In the last one, you haven't seen the last one in the chat. This is something about the new the relationship with Ukraine, Russia, the supply of natural gas and the prices and whatever. What do you think the last declaration of your boss?
Well,
and the relationship with renewables.
Yeah, I cannot say much on this. I think our boss explained it very clearly about the position of Russia, and they can increase the output in terms of meeting the supply needs of Europe. So I don't have further comments, but seems like the situation is tight.
Thank you, Heymi. I haven't seen in the chat another one. No, the hydrogen you are treating that as separately as the biofuels. No, biofuels you are treating differently. The hydrogen you are starting to put your charts on that, but this is something different from this. Okay, thank you very much, Heymi. As always, it's a pleasure having you here. I think you are forecasting a bright future for Europe and for Spain in this field or law. We are half of the net zero targets, but we are increasing a lot, I think. Thank you very much for answering all these questions you will have. We will see you next time here. I hope we will see in person for sure. We will see in person because you are delivering this report at the end of the year, more or less, no, in December. No, this is the time for this report, and next December you will be here for sure. Thank you very much. Muchas gracias a todos por atender a esta presentación. Muchas gracias y buenos días a todos por todo. Gracias, Heymi. Es un placer. Buenos días.